Senator Rand Paul has just joined the program. Senator, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Peter. Glad to be with you.
Hey, and before we talk, I got to congratulate you. I just read that Time magazine named you one of the most 100 influential people in the world.
Boy, I don't know what's up with that, but no, we're excited about that. In fact, I'll be in New York at a dinner next week for this.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever thought that would be the case, but let's hope that you can be one of the most influential people on Capitol Hill.
Yeah. Influence with the people or influence with the politicians is sometimes a different story.
Yeah, but, you're doing a great job up there, and you're making a lot of waves. In fact, one of your recent comments did not go unnoticed by President Obama, who didn't specifically invoke your name, but, he had your image in his mind as he spoke these words, responding to your, I think, very poignant and accurate accusation at the way the president is exploiting the families from Newtown. And by the way, I'm not sure if you know, but my 10-year-old son lives in Newtown, Connecticut. But listen to what the commander-in-chief had to say about you, cut number 16.
I've heard folks say that having the families of victims lobby for this legislation was somehow misplaced. A prop, somebody called them. Emotional blackmail, some outlets said. Are they serious? Do we really think that thousands of families whose lives have been shattered by gun violence don't have a right to weigh in on this issue? Do we think their emotions, their loss, is not relevant to this debate? So all in all, this was a pretty shameful day for Washington.
I wonder why he's pausing so much. I wonder if the teleprompter is moving a little slowly there. But so Rand, are you serious?
Well, my point has always been, and this is what I said before that comment, is that I have 3 boys, and I can't imagine one of them going to school and being shot or killed. I can't imagine the grief. Well, I can imagine, but I just can't. It's hard to fathom, if you aren't one of those parents, the grief that you have to go through to lose one of your kids at school. You've got a child in that same town. And I absolutely can understand where those families are. In fact, I can see it in the eyes of that father who's testified several times. So I do not question their sincerity at all. But I do question politicians who take someone's personal tragedy and politicize it. And I think they are politicizing some terrible tragedy. And I just find it demeaning that the president would use them that way. And I don't fault the families. They have every right to grieve. They also have every right to have their opinion on this. And I want to do something, too. I want to do something that would prevent killings like this. I just don't think that these young mass murderers who are not deterred by the death penalty, they're not deterred by dying at the end of their violence, that they're somehow going to be deterred by gun registration. I think the thing that might deter them is if Connecticut announced that, guess what, we are no longer having gun-free zones at schools, that any school that wants to can have concealed carry for teachers, for principals, and that some of our schools will also have security guards. I think if you announce that, that would be a deterrence, and you wouldn't get these kids showing up at schools.
Yeah, the whole idea, though, they want to create the idea that if you vote against the gun control, that somehow you don't empathize or sympathize with these families, that you're simply rubbing salt in their open wounds. And I know for a fact that there are plenty of residents of Newtown, including some who lost loved ones, who oppose gun control.
Right. Well, the bottom line is if you do oppose it, you don't want to be paraded out there either. There are a lot of people who don't want to be paraded out there because they want time to grieve over the loss of their loved ones. And I just think that it's wrong to take those emotions and that sadness and politicize it. And every ounce of my body has sympathy for them as a parent. And like I say, I think it's a grief that's hard to probably overcome when you lose one of your kids. But at the same time, we should, we have to try to do things that would actually help. And I think that several states, I was on the radio in Tennessee this morning, they tell me in Tennessee they are changing some of the laws on gun-free zones and allowing there to be teachers with concealed carry. They're setting up courses for teachers. They're setting up, an apparatus for having more security guards or retired policemen to be part of a security guard system. And it's unfortunate that it comes to that, but I don't know how else we would stop this.
Yeah, that would actually work, but that does not fit into the narrative of the left on banning guns. And in fact, I just read a statistic earlier in the show, that applies to Washington, D.C., about the proliferation of gun homicides among African-American teenagers in Washington, D.C., where it's 20 times the national average, but it is illegal for teenagers to buy guns. Illegal. There's not a background check. It's not about, registration. It's flat out illegal, yet it doesn't stop them from buying them and murdering people at 20 times the national average.
The other thing to realize is that 90% of crime, or nearly 90% of crime, is committed by people who steal the weapon that they commit the crime with. The crime at Newtown was committed by guns that were stolen. And so we have to realize that the good people obey gun laws, and you can make really strict gun laws, but then the good people who want guns for hunting, self-defense, sport, shooting, they will have to pay higher prices, higher taxes, and have more paperwork to go through on this. But the bad people, the ones who commit the crime, they're not deterred by laws, because they're not even deterred by the death penalty. They're not deterred by life in prison. They're not deterred by dying at the end of their shooting spree. So is gun registration going to deter mass murderers?
Yeah, no, it's not. Hey, tell me about the politics, the behind-the-scenes arm twisting. What was going on in the Senate there that ultimately led to this latest bill being voted down or not passing?
Well, I think that all of the groups and all of the people who've written and called their senators made a big difference. And, I went to a Freedom to Fish rally about a separate issue on fishing near dams in Kentucky, and 300 fishermen showed up. But guess what? They were also insistent that we not infringe on their Second Amendment rights either. So I would like people to know who are listening to you that calling, particularly big issues like this, if you call and write and email your legislator, it does make a difference. And also go to their meetings when they come to your district and let them know how you feel.
Yeah, I mean, do you see this as the first of many potential future defeats for the president, or is it maybe an aberration?
We'll see. I'm not positive exactly where we're going on this. The other problems that face us, and the biggest problems really that face the country, are, managing this enormous debt and trying to get a control on it. And I think we're at loggerheads on that because the president still wants to raise taxes another $1 trillion, which I think would cripple the economy, and he just doesn't get it. And really, in our history, the only things that have really ever worked as a stimulus that government does is reducing tax rates and leaving more money in the private economy. Just finishing up a book on Coolidge by Amity Shlaes, and in there she really talks about how they kept lowering the top rate, letting the rich keep more of their income, and it was a dramatic stimulus, and the economy boomed under lower tax rates.
Yeah, well, that's what got the country going after the Second World War. It was the fact that the government stopped spending money, and there was more money in the private sector, which, by the way, enabled us to pay down a lot of that debt that we accumulated to fight the war. What is the status of your budget? I know you've got your own budget proposal there. That's certainly much better than anything else that's floating around up there on the Hill. Is it getting any traction? Are you getting any more converts?
Well, we last year introduced a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, and every Republican voted for that. In that amendment, it says that you have to balance the budget within 5 years. Well, that's what my budget does. I had the only budget this year introduced on the Senate side that would balance the budget in 5 years, consistent with the balanced budget amendment, and we got 18 votes. Last year I got 16, so I'm moving on up. We just got to keep working. We didn't get any Democrats to support balancing the budget, and in fact the president's budget never balances. The Senate Democrat budget never balances. So we keep pushing them, and I think ultimately people have to realize that it is not an extreme position to say we should only spend what money comes in.
Yeah, the problem for me is how many Republican senators are there?
We have 45, and we got 18, a little less than half of them voted to balance the budget in 5 years.
Well, why don't they all? Because I'm sure every one of those Republican senators, when they go back and campaign for re-election, are going to say they're for a balanced budget. Yet they have the opportunity to sign on to one, and they refuse to do it. Why?
Many people are for balancing the budget in the abstract until they have to look at the cuts they would actually have to make. And if some of those cuts include projects in their state, they become wary of the parochial special interests who want those projects. And it isn't easy. I mean, we do have to cut significant amounts of government. We eliminate certain departments. We eliminate the Department of Education, send it back to the states. We eliminate most of the Department of Energy and send that back to the marketplace. We eliminate most of the Department of Commerce, which is a bunch of corporate welfare. And to do this, it would be dramatic changes. But I think the economic stimulus that would come from reducing what government takes out of the economy would be enormous. We have a flat income tax of 17% corporate and personal with very few deductions, and that would leave $600 billion in the marketplace, which I think would be an enormous boon and would create tens of millions of jobs.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody can call themselves a Republican and oppose your plan. In fact, if you really are one of the most 100 influential men in the world, and I think you're the only, I don't know, maybe you're the only senator to make that list, which means you're the most influential senator in Washington, you've got to get those other guys on board to stand behind your budget. I mean, how can my audience help make that happen?
Call, write, talk to, show up at meetings, and then ultimately maybe run for some office. And so there are a lot of ways we can. I think we're winning the war in many facets. If you go into economic departments around the country, you're finding that most of them are for free trade. Most of them believe that the best efficient distribution of goods comes from a marketplace, not from a government. The ideas of the Austrian economists as well as the Friedmanites really permeates a lot of colleges now. And so I think we're winning the battle in some ways. I just hope that the country hangs on long enough. And I am worried about crisis formation. I'm worried about, when interest rates are no longer controllable by the Federal Reserve, and when you get 5 or 10, and I know you've talked about this, what happens to the burden of debt if you have 5 or 10% interest rates? It probably would be unmanageable.
Yeah, that crisis is coming. Hey, by the way, I read an article recently where both your father and myself were listed as 5 of the biggest losers in the country from the decline in the price of gold. Somehow they're trying to use the decline in gold as a way to discredit people who believe in sound money and limited government. Are you buying any gold on this pullback?
Well, here's the thing is that even with the decline, I have a certain percentage of my, retirement money that I've been saving for 20 years that I have in gold mutual funds, and they've doubled and tripled in the last 10 years. So a little bit of pullback. Gold is still probably the best investment of the last decade, I would guess.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how they wait for one little pullback over 12 years, and somehow it discredits everything we've been saying over that period of time. Meanwhile, our critics, somehow they're validated, even though they're the ones that have been wrong. Hey, Senator Paul, I really appreciate the time that you shared with us today, and I really appreciate even more the excellent work that you're doing in the U.S. Senate. Everybody, we got a quick break coming up. We'll be back. We got one final segment after this.